Mortgages and the top three questions that people have regarding halal mortgages. Welcome to Canadian Mortgage Weekly. My name is Joe Bladdock, and I am here today to be your host on episode 175. So excited to be here with you to discuss these halal mortgages because they're becoming pretty popular in Canada right now. Had a lot of requests for them over the last few years, actually leading into COVID and beyond, as Canada's population increases that are asking for these halal based mortgages. And they're really interesting mortgages. I'll get into some of the top questions in my episode today here. But essentially, they are compliant with Sharia law, which is a Muslim based law. And it talks about how it's illegal to pay interest or accept any interest from um, as a Muslim. So with these kind of mortgages, you're actually buying a home and using financing that is complying with Sharia law. And these are mortgages that are becoming really popular in Canada. And as a result, the Liberals actually have put together some initiatives to make these types of mortgages more accessible to Canadians. And as these mortgages become more accessible to Canadians, they want to make sure that not only these small financial Islamic based financial companies can offer these kind of mortgages, but that other companies that are also, such as the big six banks, can look at offering these types of mortgages as well. So let me get into some of the top three questions that people have about these kind of mortgages here today. One of the main questions that folks have. I made some notes here. I put these notes here together from different articles around the web. So I'll mention these articles as I go through my episode because there's just quite a lot of information out there. So to put it all together did take a little bit of time, but essentially we're going to look at first what is a halal mortgage, and a lot of people don't know what a halal mortgage is. I remember when I first was asked for one many years ago, I didn't know what a halal mortgage was either. And it was really interesting to dive into that world and look at the lenders that are available that offer these types of products. It was really great to dive into the world of what's exactly the types of companies that offer these kind of products, how they operate, what kind of documentation they look for, how are they different than other mortgage companies. And I also looked at just the types of different halal mortgages that are available because there's also different types available as well. Okay, so let's look at this here. There we go. That's much better. Okay, so we are looking at what is a halal mortgage, and a halal mortgage is essentially a kind of mortgage actually that complies with what's called Sharia law, complies with Islamic principles, Islamic teachings, and there's quite a large Islamic population now in Canada, and it is ever increasing. So to have these types of products available for these Canadians is a great new way to make some more products available in the mortgage marketplace, which benefits all Canadians really at the end of the day because having additional products creates additional competition. So a halal mortgage is this kind of mortgage that complies with these Islamic principles and teachings. Under Sharia law, it's it's forbidden for Muslims to receive and pay interest. So a halal mortgage essentially takes the interest completely out of the equation altogether. So you're getting a mortgage and you're not paying any interest, but it's set up a little differently. I'll get into that in a few moments here. But the key thing is that you're not paying interest, and because of that, it is Sharia compliant and follows the Muslim-based teachings and principles. Okay. Um, Instead of the mortgage being based on the principle of a profit, uh, so instead of interest, the way it works is the companies look at it a little bit differently, where they don't start charging interest, but they do it and replace it with essentially a fee. And I'll get into that in a few moments here. The way that different mortgage companies that provide these halal mortgages and how this fee works, because it essentially replaces the interest costs altogether. But there are a number of companies in Canada that are just a little bit smaller that provide these Sharia compliant mortgages. The end result, though, is that the home ownership is the same after the whole process is completed. Say, for example, you have a mortgage and you have this mortgage for 25 or 30 years, and you're paying this mortgage off over 25 or 30 years, and you get to the end of that mortgage, then you own your home and you don't have a mortgage anymore because essentially you've made all your payments on time and you've done what is agreed to by the lender. So at that time, you own the home. Similar for a halal mortgage. If you go through the process and go through the contract term with these halal mortgages, and these halal mortgages, typically the contract terms are very similar to a mortgage, sometimes a little bit shorter, but you own the house at the end of the day there as well. So it's a really good way to get into the housing market if you have a Muslim-based faith and have uh, uh, and are looking for a halal mortgage such as one of these. So as I said, instead of charging interest as a standard mortgage would do, the contract that is set up between the lender and the client, which is the homeowner, is structured in a way that there is a fee charged for the services of providing the capital to purchase the home. So if we look at structuring it as a fee, it becomes different. It becomes like a fee for the service rather than interest for the funds. And this is the way that it becomes a Sharia compliant loan for the mortgage that the client is looking for. So even though the halal mortgages are technically interest free, doesn't mean that the lending is happening interest free. The lending is happening as a result of that fee. So there's also different types of halal mortgages. So if you're just joining me here now, we're talking about the top three questions that Canadians are having these days about halal mortgages. And halal mortgages are a really unique product in Canada that are mortgages that don't charge the home buyer or homeowner interest and instead replace the interest charged with a fee for the service of providing the capital to buy your home. So the top three questions here were, what are halal mortgages? So we looked at what is a halal mortgage. It's a mortgage that has a zero interest mortgage and instead is a fee based mortgage. We looked at types of halal mortgages, and now we're getting into types of halal mortgages. So in Canada, there are three different types of halal mortgage agreements. And I'm probably going to say this wrong because I typically have a hard time saying these words correctly. And I'm often corrected, but there's Ajara, Murabaha, and Musharaka halal mortgages. So there's those three specific types of halal mortgages available in Canada. And if I said those incorrectly, I apologize. And feel free to correct me in the comments below and let me know what the correct pronunciation would be here. Um, but essentially, there's these three different types of halal mortgages, and they're all structured a little bit differently and can meet your home ownership goals a little bit differently each time. And I think I have a favorite as well, especially in a market with rising interest rates. So let me get into these three different types of halal mortgages right now. Uh, as I said, there's Ijara halal mortgages, Murabaha halal mortgages, and Musharaka halal mortgages. They're available through these smaller Canadian lenders in Canada. And one of the reasons, really, why I'm doing this episode today is because the Liberals have mandated that the government has mandated that lenders need to make themselves aware of these types of financing options and to make and they're really pushing for these kinds of mortgages to be more available for Canadians because there is an increasing Muslim population in Canada. So to get into the first kind of halal mortgage, we looked at the Ijara halal mortgage. This is a halal mortgage that is structured more like a rent to own agreement would be structured in Canada. This is where you enter into an agreement with the Islamic financial company where the inhabitant starts out as a renter of the home, and then following the regular schedule of payments, once the final payment is made, the home inhabitant then becomes the home owner at the end of that contract. So that contract can be years long. So um, something about this contract that uh, is apparent to me is what happens if you're not at the end of the contract and you want to sell your home. How does that work? Are you still a renter? Do you own anything at that point? Do you have the equity at your disposal? Is something in the contract that that is around that? I don't know. That's something that is specific to each type of one of these halal mortgages. So the second type of halal mortgage in Canada would be the murabaha type of halal mortgage. It's a second type of halal mortgage here that is specifically structured as a cost plus financing option. Whereas when you're buying the home, uh, you're paying for the home, which is the cost, and the cost plus structure. Essentially, the Islamic company becomes the owner of that home that you want to buy, and then sells it to you as as you being their client for a price that includes a profit rate, and that profit rate is benchmarked against the Bank of Canada overnight lending rate. And essentially, the client, in this case, would enter into a purchase agreement then with the company. And then it specifies in this purchase agreement that the monthly payments can be made up to 15 years. Once the payments are completed, then the home sale then takes place at that time. So the whole contract can be 15 years long. So long contracts here, everyone. If we look at it from this perspective, like these are long contracts that you're essentially binded to. And there's a lot of ifs and what happens when that would be in my question box here to ask sellers or the finance company what happens and make sure it's in your agreement. What happens if you sell? What happens if you don't need the property anymore? Or what happens if you want to move to another property? Can you put your contract over? How did the costs work? All that is something that I would definitely recommend you talk to your mortgage broker. If you need a mortgage broker, I've been in the business of financing real estate now for 14 years. You can always book an appointment with me through the link in the video description below and book a 5-minute mortgage call with me to get things started or ask your question. But essentially, if you're just joining me here now, we're looking at the three different types of halal mortgages in Canada. right now. We talked about the three different questions. The first question was, what are halal mortgages? And they are essentially an interest free type of mortgage where the interest is replaced by a fee that is used for the purposes of providing the capital for the financing. Second question is, what are the three different types of halal mortgages in Canada? And we're just getting to that right now. We talked about IJARA mortgages that are structured more like a rent to own agreement, where you're essentially a tenant until the final payment is made, and then you become the homeowner. And there's the Murabaha agreement, which is the agreement where you essentially have the finance company buy the home and then sell it back to you for a cost plus, like a cost plus profit. And then this is profit in exchange for the service of allowing you to pay the price of the house back over a contract period of 15 years, after which you become the homeowner. And then there's the last one. That's the Musharaka. And this is the halal mortgage type where the Islamic company and its clients become homeowners, co-homeowners of the home. And then they essentially follow um, a typical 25 to 30-year contract after that. But instead of paying interest, um, the schedule essentially starts off with the client owning none of the home and the finance company owning 100% of the home. And as you make each payment, that changes proportionally. And at the end of the period, then after the final payment, the Islamic financial company owns 0% of the home, and the home uh, buyer owns 100% of the home as they pay out the remaining share of that partnership. So essentially, you're partnering with that company to buy your home and provide you with the capital in exchange for being able to and essentially they're charging that fee embedded in that reschedule of payments instead of interest. This one's really interesting because it allows you to set a contract length that is 15 to 20 years long, sorry, 25 to 30 years long, which allows you to essentially lock in that payment for 25 to 30 years. So in a little bit of a way, you can look at taking a halal mortgage like this 2, 3 years ago, where interest rates were really low, and locking into a payment schedule with them for 25 to 30 years as being a good thing because you'd be in this position where you took out a halal mortgage at the right now, looking back at it, the lowest possible financial cost, since it is tiered with the uh, typically with the Bank of Canada overnight rate. And you could have looked at locking in those payments at that time. And as mortgage payments go up and folks are renewing their mortgage every 3 to 5 to 10 years at current rates, you wouldn't need to deal with any of that because your financing would be locked in for that 25 to 30 years. So that becomes a huge benefit with that type of halal mortgage by being able to contract out your payments specifically for 25 to 30 years, which under any kind of Canadian mortgages right now through any kind of lender is just not available. So this is one way of getting a 25 or 30-year mortgage in Canada um, without with like it's like a little bit of a hack to be able to get a 25 or 30-year locked in payment mortgage in Canada. I mean, the drawback to these, there are some drawbacks in there, and that's the third question. What are the pros and cons regarding these halal mortgages? And that's what I'm going to get into next year because there are some cons. I mean, I'm just talking about that pro here by being able to lock in that payment period, but there definitely are some cons available as well. Cons are the fact that, comparatively to the best rates out there, the halal mortgage is going to have a higher cost to it because the source of the capital for these halal mortgages is just coming at a higher cost. And that's one of the reasons the liberals have really pushed and mandated for halal mortgages to become more available in Canada, because by doing that, there will be uh, more companies out there offering these types of products, and it should bring the overall cost of these halal mortgages down to the general Canadian that is looking for them. So, if we're just getting into this now, we talked about the top three questions about halal mortgages. We're just covering off the pros and cons. Pros being you can actually lock in these typical terms for 25 up to 30 years with these Islamic financial companies, giving you the opportunity to uh, stave off any mortgage renewals where rates go up, and you won't have to deal with that through your entire home ownership period. So it's a little bit of a hack to get into a 25 or 30-year fixed rate mortgage, but essentially instead of paying interest, you're exchanging that interest for a fee. And we talked about those three different types of halal mortgages. We're going to cover those off at the end of the episode here one more time. But that's the con. The cost of capital is higher. So as these mortgages become more popular, the cost of capital should go down. And the last question, I would say, the bonus question, question four, is who can apply for a halal mortgage in Canada? And you might think that only those who believe and follow Islamic teachings and faith and principles would be able to get a Sharia compliant halal mortgage. However, they're actually available to all Canadians. And if you are a Canadian homeowner or are looking to buy a home in Canada and are looking to essentially not pay any interest and follow Islamic teachings that way, then a halal mortgage would be the way for you to get into home ownership. But really, at the end of the day, if a typical Canadian wanted to get a long term, locked in 25 or 30-year mortgage rate, then by approaching and applying for a halal mortgage, specifically the Musharaka halal mortgage, where you can uh, essentially agree to a contract that is up to 30 years in length, where the payments are exactly the same. It gives you a way to get into that kind of financing for you as a Canadian. So it's a very different type of financing in Canada. And the Liberals are looking at expanding it and making it more available to Canadians, and have asked the financial institutions in Canada to look at uh, these types of products more closely. One thing to consider, though, is that these still are available right now through mortgage brokers. And if you're looking for a mortgage broker, I've been in the business for 14 years. My name is Joe. You can always book an appointment with me through the link in the video description below. I am quite familiar with Sharia compliant mortgages, been dealing with these for years already, but just to see the government now step in and say, look, we really need to make this more available in Canada is a good thing, because there is a rising population that is looking for these types of mortgages in Canada, and to make them more available will just help the mortgage market become more competitive overall, and I think it's going to be a good thing for Canadians. Let's look at some of the mortgage news that's happening outside of these top three questions for um, halal mortgages. And if you're just joining me here, we covered off the top three questions that people have right now about halal mortgages. This is essentially an interest free way of buying housing in Canada. A halal mortgage complies with Islamic principles and teachings. For example, in the Sharia law, um, those who are Muslims, it's forbidden and to receive and pay interest. So a halal mortgage takes the interest out of the equation. There's three different types of halal mortgages. One is a rent-to-own agreement type. This is Ijara, where the inhabitant is essentially a tenant for the length of the term and then becomes an owner upon the final payment. And there's Murabaha, which is a cost plus structure where the financing company will buy the home on your behalf and then sell it back to you, and you split up those payments over a term of, say, 15 years. And the payments include a fee for the service of doing that instead of interest. And the third type is of mortgage under the halal mortgages are the musharaka mortgages, where the owner of the home becomes a co-owner with the financing company, and the each payment changes the ownership structure percentage-wise, but with the Islamic financial institution being 100% and the inhabitant being 0%. And as each payment is made, that changes. So the inhabitant is 100% owner, and the Islamic financial company is a 0% owner. And the pros and cons of financial mortgages are the pros. You can actually lock into a very long term, like similar to a US 30-year mortgage. You can take a halal mortgage for 30 years and you have a locked in payment. You don't have to worry about mortgage renewals coming in higher. So that's really good. The cons are typically the payments would be a little bit higher than on a AAA mortgage because the source of the capital is coming at a higher cost to these Islamic financial institutions. It's not as easy. So, because of that, the costs are higher, and the whole outcome of liberals pushing for these halal mortgages to become more available in Canada because they're not available through the big six banks right now, hopefully will bring the cost of capital down and make them more available to Canadians. And because really, at the end of the day, anyone can apply for these kind of mortgages. You don't have to um, have a certain faith or background. They're available to all Canadians. So it's a great way to get into that 30-year long-term fixed structure if you're looking for that kind of home ownership structure. Fixed rates are a little bit up this week, guys. They look to be trending upwards this week. There's been news coming out of the American economy having higher inflation. Canadian inflation came in higher last month as well. We saw Canadian inflation jump from 2.8% to 2.9%. We saw American inflation jump as well, which caused interest rates to start that upward trend in Canada, and inflation jumped in the US from 3.2% to 3.5%. So that's quite a jump. And for home prices in Canada, I always like to cover that as well. Home prices actually went up 4% in Canada the month prior. Actually, no, that was the prior month. There's new data now. They went up another 1.9% in Canada on an average sold price for Canadian house prices in Canada. Currently, average sales price is sitting at $698,530. We're so close at cracking that $700,000 mark. And we haven't had property prices crack that $700,000 mark since June of 2023. So for the home prices now to return to these levels is pretty fantastic. We'll have to see if it's sustained and continues. So everyone, thanks for watching today. My name is Joe Bladdock. You can always book an appointment with me. I'm a mortgage broker with 14 years financing real estate in Canada. You can look at that appointment link in the video description below. And you can also follow my channels, subscribe to my YouTube or my TikTok channel for further updates. I try to release a video every few days, and you can see that. I have over 600 videos on my YouTube page there you can take a look at for different mortgage tips. In the meantime, thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you have a great day, And we'll see you next week here on Canadian Mortgage Weekly, Canada's weekly video mortgage news podcast.